All right, welcome back everyone to the AMAX Encyclopedia, episode 3 of the Guns of Grandmaster, showing you a little tabletop rendition of guns that I use to shoot Grandmaster in USPSA. Just to, again, reiterate for the series, to show you that you can do it if you want to. The guns themselves aren't anything particularly special, even though sometimes they're rumored to be a little bit of secret menu items. They're just guns. It's the Indian, not the arrow. And then 3, if you're in a position of trying to equip yourself for this division, or you're in the market, kind of run down some of the specific touch points that I picked and what I think about them, things that you should think about if you're getting into a gun in this segment. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than the other ones because Atlas Gunworks currently doesn't make a single stack gun. They did at one time. They made a Titan single stack, and before that they did custom single stacks. Those are discontinued items right now. Running joke I have that's probably really only funny to me. Every time I asked Atlas for a single stack gun, they told me I couldn't have one, which is probably for the best because guns in those eras turned into what is now the Erebus and the Athena. And those are unquestionably more successful guns than the single stack guns were. However, if you have one out there, if I were to come across the opportunity and the means to get one, I would absolutely purchase an Atlas Titan single stack. But there are not very many of them out there, and I don't know that very many of the people who have them are willing to sell them. So it was never really an option for me. I do have an Atlas custom single stack gun. It is not single stack legal for USPSA because it has a bull barrel in it. And we're not going to show it to you today because it has unreleased product on it, so it's not ready for camera time today. So, single stack in USPSA, which gun I did it with, that could be kind of a journey of a story as well. We're going to abbreviate it for you here a little bit because I started shooting single stack when I first got into the sport 12-15 years ago now. And in that time I was shooting IDPA, so I was shooting CDP, custom defensive pistol, and I was doing it with this gun. Now this gun is my first gun. I bought this on my 21st birthday. It was the nicest 1911 I could fathom affording and get the funds together for. Is the first gun that I bought without help from my dad. This is it, 21st birthday. I cared more about this than anything I could put in my mouth. So this is the one I started with, shot it for several years, and didn't really need to leave this ever, but as an enthusiast, as a collector, as someone in the industry, I was wooed by other things, especially as I started working at a gun store, had means and access to higher level 1911s. I started to wander into different things, but this was a very solid gun for a very long time. For the most part, I would consider this gun retired now. Nothing against it, I just have nicer stuff. So limited time, limited resources, unlimited wants. I usually shoot other guns now, except once in a blue moon when I bring this one out just for fun or to carry it. This gun is definitely proven to be reliable enough to be a carry gun, so it does find its way into a holster that way quite a bit. As a competition gun, though, it's basically retired, and it's basically a box stock Springfield TRP. They're still in production today, although they recently gave them a facelift. Really, the only thing I did to this pistol was I sent it to Heine back when Richard Heine was actually still doing this kind of stuff, and it has a set of sights installed by the man himself, which I guess is actually kind of a big deal now that he's one of the greats and he's mostly retired. But other than that, box stock 45 TRP. Shotguns like this and like this configuration kind of bought the Kool-Aid from the tactical greats of the time, that this was all you need, nothing you don't. Got to finding that I did need a couple things. Guns and guns like this at competition at a high level, started to really need adjustable sights. That was one thing that moved me away from this family of pistols. And then this one's in 45. So when I was shooting a 45, it seemed like the whole world was shooting 40s. And again, told it in other videos, but that is actually how I originally found Atlas Gunworks, was I found his video explaining why people shoot 40 in single stack. And so in my head, I needed to try the 40 thing out. And that is part of what led me to this gun. All right, so this is a Wesson SSC. This gun also has a little bit of a fun collector story, because while I was working retail at the gun store, I don't have very many regrets as far as the one that got away. But if there was a Katy Perry gun, this was it. We did have an SSC come in used, and I watched it sit on the shelf. It was a good price. At that time, I was representing a custom builder, and in my head I was like, well, I should really be shooting one of those instead of this, and I let it get away. It sold on Gunbroker, ended up somewhere in Texas, but always regretted not buying that gun. And so when Dan Wesson, as they periodically do, they reintroduce guns. They do small batches of guns from the past that aren't popular enough for them to produce full-time, but they get enough demand for them. The SSC was one of these, and my friend at work got wind that they were doing this, had the hookup at the time, and actually he knew personally I was going through a rough patch, was kind of down in the dumps, and as a pick-me-up, he said, hey man, I know you can't right now, but I know you've been looking for one of these, and they made some more, so I got one for you. It's here when you're ready. And so my friend Travis did a solid for me there, and I was able to eventually pick this up from him and start doing God's work with it. But that is kind of the story on this gun. I was actually able to go back and right a wrong in my collecting past and get a Dan Wesson SSC. But in my head, to really get GM and be competitive at a high level in single stack, I needed an adjustable sight gun, and I needed a 40 gun. And so that's what this is. So tip to butt here, just kind of quintessential things and what to think about in single stack. This is a bushing barrel gun, which is a requirement for USPSA, and I believe IDPA and anywhere else that you can shoot a 1911 that's relevant. They usually require you to have a bushing barrel. Whether that's relevant now or not, I don't know, but it's still the rule. So it's a bushing barrel 40 gun, 5-inch, obviously, full-length guide rod. Now, every Nimrod that wants to be a YouTube expert on guns and review stuff will tell you that they put the guide rod in the gun so that it adds a little bit of weight towards the muzzle so it does not flip as much. Whatever. Okay? Whatever. I don't know that anybody can really feel the difference on that. I do, however, have a solid preference for having a guide rod, which is a deviance from some of the other experts in the fighting 1911 world, who would have a strong preference away from one of these. If they say not to get one of these, usually the argument is that you need tools to get it apart. Well, currently, this being one of them, the one-piece guide rods that are commonly being used now in Dan Wessons and other high-end guns, they're toolless to take apart. So you can take them apart just the same way you can on a GI bushing setup. So that argument that you need special tools is null and void. We're not necessarily racking these on tables like Delta operators are. So, you know, while that's a valid concern for them, we are not them. So The reason I want one and why I would recommend you consider getting one is, again, it goes into when we start to get into guns like this and high-end guns or guns we're going to spend a lot of time with, the little stuff matters. How it feels under recoil matters. And what it does for you is, in a conventional style 1911, the spring is captive in there, and as the slide retracts and it coils in there, it rubs on the frame, and that gives you kind of a little bit of a grainy sensation in the action of the slide. It is very similar to what you experience on a buffer tube of an AR-15, especially cheaper AR-15s, when you rack them and they go shh, 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 and you can hear that thing right up next to your cheekbone. Higher end guns, it's not as much. You get into even higher end guns like JPs and I'm forgetting the name of my friend, but the captured mainspring housing systems. One of the big advantages of those, or the reason people like them, is because they eliminate that sound, that sensation of that spring rubbing on the buffer tube. Same thing here. All right, I couldn't put my finger on it for the longest time, but I would get guns at the store, and same, Springfield, Wilson to Wilson, Nighthawk to Nighthawk, Ed Brown to Ed Brown. One feel a little bit different than the other, and I couldn't really put my finger on it until I was like, oh, it's the guide rod. It's that what I'm feeling between these is a lack of coil bind of the spring on the frame. So this is a gun you're going to shoot a lot. You're going to shoot, you're going to dry fire a lot. You're going to spend a lot of time with in a competitive environment. I would say the reason that you want a full-length guide rod is for that to eliminate that sensation of the spring rubbing on the frame. Get a one piece or get the toolless style, like the Atlas style guide rods that come apart without tools. That two-piece one that Springfield uses, I don't know why they use that, but that one is dumb. But a solid one-piece guide rod system is absolutely a tangible difference. Not in muzzle flip, I mean, maybe, but I mean, this gun's got 15,000 rounds on it. I'm here to tell you I can't feel a difference between a guide rod and not a guide rod. From a muzzle flip standpoint, I can absolutely tell you a difference between the sensation of the slide going back and forth. When we start to talk about barrel fit, slide fit, and all that stuff, all that chatter of the gun as the slide is in motion, when the slide is in motion, it absolutely feels buttery smoother if you have a full-length guide rod in there. Stock barrel that came in it. This is one of the few production guns, especially in today's day and age, that you could get chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson. I think most of the it was super niche at the time. I couldn't figure out where all these 40 guns come from. Like, everybody seemed to have one, but I didn't know where you would buy one. I think a lot of them were rebarreled 10mm guns. So they put a cart or a Nolan or some barrel like that in there. They had one installed for 40. That's ultimately where they came from. I would say current production, this is probably the only one in 40 even worth considering. SIG did one for a while. That was maybe okay. I don't know. I never shot that one, but that was the only other one that I saw factory configured in 40 Smith & Wesson. Other than that, I mean, it's a rare bird to find. And like I said, there's especially in the caliber video, we talked about this a little bit, but there was an era where this was a cheater gun. All right, it was the move for a few reasons. One, before they really caught on to it, you could you could put more rounds into a 40 magazine than you could a 45, because a 40 is physically smaller than a 45. So in a magazine size restricted division like single stack, the gun has to fit in a box. There's a box of a certain dimension. You have to put your gun in and close the lid, and it has to fit. They could fit more rounds of 40 in a single stack mag than they could 45. So you could get 9 instead of 8. Well, the rules committee caught on to that, all right? And then they said, okay, to declare major, you can only have 8, and to declare minor, you can only have 10. Okay. And then there was the era of, like I said, this video that I found from Atlas Gunworks where they're saying, okay, well, if you shoot a 40 gun, you can have magazines that hold 10. There are 10 round 40 magazines. So essentially you could bring major ammo and minor ammo to a match, and you could look at the stages, and before you start, you could decide if you're declared major or minor for a competitive advantage. While in theory that works, and I've heard of it being done, I've yet to meet the person that actually did that actually had a 40 gun and elected to shoot minor. I've met plenty of people who decided to shoot 9mm minor, but they either already had a 9mm gun or they decided long ago that they were shooting minor. But they either, if they shoot minor, it's because they wanted to shoot 9mm. If they had 40 or 45, they were shooting major. And there wasn't no two ways about that. Having a 40 gun myself, I can tell you I have never gone to a match and said, yep, competitive advantage to shoot minor at this match, I'm going to do that. And we get more into that in the caliber selection video. For the most part, I think what made 40 guns prevalent when I started shooting was that limited was the predominantly dominant division that people were competing in. So they had a limited load, worked up a 40 load. They had a setup to load 40, and they were primarily shooting 40. This was before 9mm was the primary caliber. So most people were shooting 40 major in limited, but they wanted to shoot some single stack, especially when they wanted to shoot when the single stack classic match was very popular. They were going to shoot single stack to shoot that match, and then they were going to go back to limited, so they could seamlessly jump back and forth on the same ammo. So I would say more efficiency or laziness is what made 40 more prevalent than anything, more so than any merits of the caliber. Because I can tell you one of the things that this gun taught me is that 40 is perhaps one of the most miserable cartridges you could chamber a 1911 for. Second only to 9mm. Yep, I said it. Second only to 9mm. It has all the pain in the butt of being a shorter cartridge than 45 in this pistol that was designed to be a 45. Again, refer to that other video. It has all the pain in the butt of shooting 9mm. However, 9mm is kind of a hot chick, all right? So it's more economical to shoot. It's easier to find. Predominantly, that's what people are shooting now. So this is the mainstream cartridge now. So that gives you some incentive to have a gun chambered in it. But 40 is, you know, it's a pain in the butt and it's not hot. All right. So like this is all of the pain and none of the perks of having a 9mm gun. It's absolutely miserable and I hate it in single stack. This gun made me want to go back to 45 very quickly. I stuck and stayed and made it pay for a long time. But ultimately ended up buying another gun to go forward in single stack with, because I wanted to get back to 45. Another reason I wanted to try 40 though, before I knew better, what I originally liked shooting in 45 was a 200 grain lead semi-wad cutter. If I can get it to focus there for you here. All right, so this gun has, or this bullet has a bit of a different taper to it, and you'll see near the case mouth there is a square shoulder. So this bullet, when it hits a paper target, it's like shooting a hole saw through the air. It cuts a very square edge on the target, so it's very easy to score. It's very clean to score, and you know, sometimes like the line breaks go a little bit more your way when you're shooting some of this. But when I was shooting this back in the day, the load that I really liked was a 200 grain, and that was because I was shooting semi-wad cutters. So when I found out that you could get a 40 in a 200 grain, and I had a unique access to 40 components, brass primers, small primers instead of large primers, things like that. I was like, oh, well, I think I could probably replicate what I liked about 45 in 40, and I could get all these other advantages that everyone tells me about. And it didn't really pan out that way. I tried the 45 powder charge in this cartridge, and it didn't really pan out that way. I tried the powder charge that I ended up liking in this cartridge in 45. That didn't end up really working that way. It wasn't dangerous or anything like that. It just wasn't same but different, but not same. So once I found out that this wasn't really what I had hoped for it to be, and it was a pain in the butt. The mags are a pain in the butt. The ammo's a pain in the butt. And 40 is getting to be a more and more rare cartridge by the day. So the juice just wasn't really worth the squeeze. One of the things you got to do if you're shooting 40 in this cartridge is I load it long. Now, a lot of people will say they load 40 long. I load it 45 long, all right? So not just a couple hundredths, all right? I load it like as long as I can get it to fit in the magazine. So I use a 10 millimeter magazine, all right? So it doesn't have the spacer in it like a 40 mag would. A 40 mag is very similar to a 9 millimeter 1911 mag that has that spacer in the back. So I use a 10 millimeter mag with a cartridge that I load to a very long length that is basically just short enough to fit in the magazine. That is the best way I can get this gun to work. And now some people will latch onto that and be like, oh, well, so it doesn't work short. No, it works okay, but the way things that work okay tend to work out is they tend to break your heart when it matters, all right? So I was shooting factory 40 when at a match. I was shooting the match certified ammunition, all right? And I had some feeding issues, just enough that it cost me enough where I fell below my goal of where I wanted to be, all right? And so that's kind of the kiss of death for a gun. If a gun does you dirty like that, first time I was like, all right, I'm coming back with hand-loaded ammunition. I'm not shooting factory ammunition anymore. And while that alleviated most of my problems, it still is just like, you know what? And most single stack shooters I talk to are like this. They're like, I would rather shoot a 45. The guns feel better as 45s, and they work better as 45s. So I found my way back to a 45. More on that in a second. Other things on this particular gun configuration-wise, really the only thing I changed on here are, like most high-end shooters, would be the touch point. So I changed the trigger, not the trigger actually how it breaks itself. I changed the trigger shoe. So this is an Atlas extra short trigger bow in there. I wanted to try a short trigger for a while. Realistically, I probably like the next size longer than this. I like the short or medium. I could go either way with a nod towards short. This is the extra short, and it does work out pretty well, but going forward, I would pick short. But I like to have a flat trigger. So that was the main reason I swapped this. It was a curved trigger, a medium curved. I wanted a flat. And so wanted to play with an extra short. I got an extra short. And then being a thrifty sort, once I got it in there, I wasn't changing it. And it looks cool. So I put an Atlas flat shoe trigger in there. I put some VZ grips on there that are just a bit different of a texture than what comes on the gun. Everyone's going to have their own preference as to what kind of texture they want on their grips. I usually like the VZ. I forget what they call them, but it's basically the same grips that I've always had on the TRP and guns like it. And then it's all stock up here, all bar stock, fire control parts. Haven't played with those at all. I did end up, I shot this gun to the point, I believe I have a documented 12,000 rounds on this gun or more. I forget the number off the top of my head. That should have looked before I did this video. It's at least 12,000 rounds. Between live fire and dry fire, I actually wore out the mainspring in here. So I shot and dry fired this gun to the point where it was light striking primers and I had to change the mainspring. So that was a new one for me. Texturing on the front strap, the stock checkering that, or yeah, serrations that Dan Wesson does on the front here. I think they're 25 or 30 LPI. It's a good texture. That's what you want. And then I swapped out the mag well. Now it came with a mag well, and guns I'd had in the past, I've had the Dawson ice well, which is what this is. So in my mind, I was like, when I was moving away from, tactical style guns, I was like, all right, I'm getting the ice well again. I'm going all in. I had the no gap before. You'll see right here, there's a little gap here. That is for the over insertion stop on your magazine. All right, so that can go in and butt up against your frame so that you can't crash your magazine into your ejector. Up on top here, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it, but if your magazine crashes into your ejector, which essentially is kind of friction fit in there, maybe pinned on a higher end gun, but still not good to crash your magazine into it. So I went with the gap version. If you were gonna do a Dawson well, I would probably go back on that and I would go the no gap. The thing about the no gap is that you have to file off your over insertion stop here, which basically meant you had to get their base pads. So initially I got this because I was going to use the stock base pads on the magazines that I had and not invest in these ones. What I found though, if we stunt double in this Wilson magazine, so here's just a standard Wilson ETM, you can get it in there, but your palm crashes into this mag well enough that you might not get a full seat on the magazine in there. You actually got to go up in there a little bit, and so you get a lot of bang click if you don't get that thing all the way up in there. So that happened enough times that I ended up investing in the Dawson base pads anyway. So I went with gap instead of no gap to hopefully forego investing in base pads. That didn't end up working out. I ended up investing in the base pads anyway. I don't like these base pads, but I had the mag well, and so I had to use the system together. I would go a different route in the future. But that's the gun here. And then the mags, we've done a whole magazine video. In 40, I think your options are Wilson Combat or Trip Research. I think the Trip Research is a better product on the merits of the product itself. I use Wilson Combat more because they do have a warranty on them that is tough to beat. I come from a highly customer service oriented company, so I can appreciate the hustle on standing behind a product the way they do. Long before you will wear this thing out, as far as feeding reliably into the gun, they will stop, magazines will stop falling out. They will swell to the point, and this is one of them, so this one's on its way back pretty soon. This one won't fall all the way out of the gun. All right, it has physically swelled enough just from being loaded, from being dropped, from being stepped on. This is a spot welded piece of sheet metal. Okay, so it has been jarred enough that it has deformed just enough that it doesn't fall cleanly out of the gun. If it doesn't fall cleanly out of the gun, especially in a low cap division, it's practically worthless to me. So knowing that all of these magazines are quasi-disposable and living on borrowed time, if a company is willing to stand behind them and say guaranteed for life, I'm on board with that. And so by and large, I use the Wilson mags now. What I don't like about them I think Trip has a better follower. I think they make a better tube. And you can take this all the way apart. So you can take the spring and the follower out of this. This follower is somewhat captive in here. They have the ends of the bottom of the tube is curled around here. So this follower can't come out. Invariably, you need to clean this all the time because it gets dirt and sand and things in there from dropping it on the ground. So you can't pull it all the way out. You kind of have to go in from the top. You have to go in from the bottom. It lives in there permanently. I don't love that. But like I said, if this comes with a warranty like they do, that's pretty hard to select against. So by and large, I use Wilson mags currently because they stand behind them like that, and I know I'm going to need to replace them. Similar to the TRP though, I would consider this gun largely retired too. It got me across the line for Grandmaster in single stack, and I really wasn't going to be content until I got Grandmaster in single stack. I would say that's probably the division it was the most important to me to get it in. However, this gun led me to hate 40 single stack, and I like dark finished guns, so I wanted to get back to a black gun. But by and large, it was 40, and currently, really the only major match to compete in single stack in the Western States Single Stack Classic or Single Stack Championship, they recognize what they call a classic category as its own division. So they essentially recognize shooting 45 specifically, 45 major specifically at that match. So they essentially removed all incentive for me to shoot this gun at that match. And I fell out of love with 40 anyway. So I was on the prowl for a 45. So currently I shoot a very similar gun in 45. Now, this video has gone on long enough, so we won't necessarily break this one down today. There are a variety of guns I would have bought to fill this niche. I just happened to find a really good deal on this one. This is a Wilson Combat CQB, and it's a bit of a rare bird because it's a CQB with an adjustable sight. So 45 adjustable sight, that is the sauce, I think, for a single stack gun today. This one is not the perfect gun because it doesn't have that full length guide rod, but it makes up for that a little bit in that it has a flat wire recoil spring in it, which gives me some of the same sensation that I get from a full length guide rod. But very similarly configured guns. Just this one is black and is in 45. I also like the way that Wilson does their magwell a little bit better. Magwells are not magwells, okay? So we'll probably do a video on this too, but like if you look at this S&A magwell, specifically look at the back portion here. Look at the angle of the taper, how far out the taper comes, and look at the angle back here. All right, now look at this one. Wider area that's tapered, kind of a flat angle though. You also see how much peening there is here where the actual rubber meets the road there. All right, so hammer and anvil of magazines has somewhat shaped this magazine well. Now look at this one. All right, so not as wide of an area, a steeper taper, and more tapered, more dished out in the back here. So you would think that you'd want a big magazine well in case you like really flub this reload and it's going to somehow like drive it in towards the center here. If you really flub that reload, like it's going to help. It's not going to save you. More often than not, a magwell is going to save you from a near miss. It's going to deflect a near miss. It's going to kind of tip the ball into the net if you're close, which if you're practicing a lot really is what it's going to be close and you're driving it towards the center. This style of magwell does a better job of that. I do like the way that Wilson did this particular magwell better than any of the other magwells I've seen on the market, with the exception of the Chen. The Stan Chen one, I don't have a gun with the chop and weld Stan Chen magwell on there, so I haven't tried it personally, but I imagine that would be the ultimate. Short of that, this Wilson magwell, I think, is probably one of the better ones on the market. So even though this is the gun of Grandmaster, it too has been retired right along the side, the TRP. And for the most part now, when I shoot single stack in matches that are recognizing major, I'm shooting 45. I'm back to the 200 grain lead semi-wad cutter. It just feels better. It cuts the bigger holes. The mags work better. They last longer. That is the way. But again, you know, in the journey of single stack guns, there was quite a few. But that was my single stack Grandmaster journey. So if you thought that was interesting, I'm going to try and make Grandmaster in a couple other divisions so we can make more videos like this. Plenty of other topics I want to talk about too. If there's something you would like me to dive into and I feel like it's in my lane and I have something to say, I'm glad to make a video on it. Leave it down below. Appreciate all of you guys, and we'll see you on the range soon.